you can add a story about yourself. I know that teachers and professors sometimes will say, don't use, the I pronoun. I disagree with that. It's persuasive. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Young Eager Writers podcast. My name is Desiree Brown.
And my name is Michael Evans.
We are here to hopefully talk about some useful things for you guys. We're going to get into that, and I'm also going to get into a little bit of like my background and Michael's background as well, so we can kind of explain why we're qualified to talk about this. Hopefully, we wouldn't give you guys advice without being qualified. Maybe we might. I have no clue, but we try not to do that. I do have to say, super random note, but I did get a nicer webcam, so I can finally start recording in like higher definition.
Nice.
And I don't have the right adapter. Like I bought the wrong cord for it. So hopefully next time. But for now, hopefully the audio will sound good. That's what I'm.
I was about to say, Desiree, I don't think you look any better today, and I was curious why. I'm kidding around.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks a lot. I actually even have more makeup on today.
No, you know what I mean. I was talking about the webcam.
Eyebrows.
The webcam.
Sure. The webcam.
You look amazing, but the webcam was not looking any better. So that makes sense. I have the same problem with mine. So same boat.
One day we will get the mics and the webcams working together. I believe in us. We can do it.
That's peak podcast.
Yeah. So today we are going to talk about how to write a college essay. Specifically, we have 10 tips for you, maybe 11. Might throw a bonus in there. But everybody's going back to school now. I just started teaching again. I am a college professor. I now am teaching at Georgia State University, and I'm actually teaching. I know, I'm so excited. Like, that sounds so professional to say. Like, I'm like, oh, I teach at GSU. But I'm actually teaching a dual enrollment class. So I'm going into a high school. I'm still teaching college English composition, but I'm teaching like high school seniors pretty much and giving them this college credit. But one of the things we're going over right now is there are a lot of differences to what professors expect of you versus what high school teachers expect of you. Yes, just in class like decorum, but also in the way that you engage with text and the way that you write. So I just thought this would be a really useful episode to do. Tell some of our listeners and viewers some of the things that I have told my students, especially those who kind of have anxiety going into college for the first time and they're really unsure. But Michael, I did want to ask you first, what was that transition like for you, specifically as a creative writer, going from the high school experience to now the college experience in the academic world?
Yeah, I really think that high school is very limiting, in my opinion, when it comes to writing, because a lot of times the kind of essay structure that you're taught tends to be like relatively basic, and you start to graduate out of it by the time you get to like your upperclassman years. But kind of thinking about like that 3-point thesis, one introduction, one conclusion paragraph, and 3 body paragraphs, that kind of is like the high school essay that a lot of us are expected to write, that eventually by the time you get to college and even towards the end of high school, you realize, okay, that's not actually what a thesis looks like. Like a good thesis doesn't necessarily have to have 3 points. It definitely needs to be arguable, but it's not something that needs to have like such a set structure. And I found that college, I actually was able to be a bit more creative in the structure of my writing and the ideas that I was able to include. So it felt like an easier transition, because in high school, I really kind of disliked my essay writing. And in college, I enjoyed it more. But I also think I've enjoyed more when I'm writing it about as well, which obviously kind of plays a role in what my feelings are about the writing. So yeah, there's a lot of things to dive into, but that would be my first thoughts.
Yeah. You bring up a really good point about the creativity aspect, and that's something I talk about with my students. I do think if this eases anyone's anxiety, I think creative writers actually do pretty well in the academic writing world, because when you go off to college, it's kind of like they start lifting a lot of the rules, and you're expected now to be a full-fledged human being with opinions and thoughts and creativity, which is a little different from the public school experience, or just really the high school experience. So I think that's a really difficult transition for a lot of people, um, because it's it's totally flipped. Like, in my opinion, I feel like maybe we should start allowing high schoolers to have more creativity, allowing them to choose a lot of their own topics and stuff and get them passionate. I'm not saying that schools aren't doing this. It's just not what I've seen from my experience. And I think that's why a lot of college freshmen struggle in their academic writing and their English courses.
I want to circle back because you said just an amazing line that you're expected to be a full-fledged human being. Our wonderful producer Mel has kind of quoted this in our chat that we all have as we're recording. And that was beautiful, a full-fledged human being. Apparently, if you're in high school, you're not a full-fledged human being. So when you go to college, you will become one, and that is actually the biggest benefit of going to college.
Oh my god. I wish it was even that. First of all, I'm not even a full-fledged human being. Like,
We're still in the embryo.
yeah, like I think if somebody asked me my age, I think I'd tell them that I was like 17, because I feel like I stopped aging in my mind at that point. So,
So I just realized I said in the embryo, which is like such a dude thing to say. I don't think you could be in an embryo.
is it? Oh, can you not?
I don't know. I don't think you can. It's like in the womb, I think is what you're supposed to say. But
In the
we're
womb.
totally getting off track. I feel like
I
I can start to connect the dots and think like public high schools, like Texas has some weird public high schools. Now we're getting into like some really weird like conversations between embryos and high schoolers, and it's like way too close to politics. But um, I
Oh, jeez.
generally am in full agreement with you that we're always kind of growing up, and I really, in the full fledged human being point, I understand the underlying thing completely, despite it being very funny about we in high school are often expected to follow a cookie cutter path.
Hmm.
And then when you get to college, it's kind of like, yeah, but no, like you actually are expected to start to produce some of your own ideas, to be like scholarly in that sense. And it's kind of tricky because as writers, I think we kind of get this and are good at this more than anyone, but we also know the struggle too, which is like when writing our own books, like they are our own ideas, but like they all come from something. They're in conversation with something. They are built on top of the work of others. And I think sometimes as creative writers, we don't often like reflect on that as much as we sometimes could because it's just writing a story and this is where our passion took us. But part of academic writing is being really reflective about, okay, well, who are you in conversation with? Where are you being inspired from? Not only obviously citing those sources, but actually really analyzing them and trying to then layer your own thoughts on top. And I think that's the part that can feel uncomfortable to creative writers because the kind of like ideation process of an academic essay is a bit different than writing a fiction book, at least a lot of times, or writing, a song or a poem. Like these things can feel spontaneous, and a lot of times they are, mostly because they obviously are sparked by something. And I think we kind of want to follow that creative urge, and you can follow it, but there is a necessary amount of structure, but it looks very different than your structure in high school.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree that there is this balance that we have to find, and really, I think most people who don't practice creative writing, when they step into the collegiate academic world, they struggle with the creativity. Like you are expected now to have your own thoughts and your own writing style, and it takes a long time to form that. So I think creative writers, they they have a little bit more spunk to their writing. It's more enjoyable, but they can get carried away, and they do have to know that there are standards you still have to stick with, making sure you get enough sources, making sure that you have evidence, making sure it's persuasive, it's not just a narrative. They like to fall heavy on the side of like pathos and always pulling at your emotions, but they forget ethos and logos and the credibility and the logic. And um, yeah, so let's dive in. I do have my thoughts written out, and I'll read you my list. This is 10 tips. I don't have them in any kind of particular order, but very curious to see if you disagree or agree with some of these, Michael.
Sounds great. And I brought some tips of my own as well that I'm sure we'll get to in the
Okay,
end.
good, good, good. Because I realized that I haven't written academically in a while, even though I do so much grading. Um, the writing part of it, I'm a little out of. So, but you're in college, so you're practicing it a lot more than I am. But I do have for number one is understand the assignment, specifically understand what the professor is asking of you. Um, just to comment on that a little bit, I think, like I said, there are less rules in college writing. In your college English class, they thoroughly explain to you what needs to be done, but there is a lot more freedom, whether that's choosing your own topic, whether that's, I know even some professors where you have to submit somewhere between like 6 and 8 pages. It's not very, you just have to have it between these two numbers. So that kind of freedom can be scary sometimes, but also it can be taken out of control, and then students stop kind of following the rules. And then so I think that's something that's really important is know exactly what your professor is asking of you in a writing assignment, in an essay. What are you, the student, the writer, expected to do?
Yeah, that's, I think, really important not only when you're writing an essay, but also when you're actually writing a novel. I'm going to put a little twist in this. Maybe some of these advice I could kind of flip into also how you could take your maybe what feels more boring, disconnected academic life and actually tie it into your more fun, spunky writer life. And I think there's a big connection here because not only is it really important to understand the assignment when it's coming from someone else, but I think when it's coming from within you, your own questions that you're asking yourself, I think it's really interesting to be really reflective about it because a lot of our stories, we don't think about it like experiments, and an experiment doesn't sum it all up. But in a sense, we are confronting our characters with a set of problems, building a world around it, and we oftentimes don't know how they're going to respond, how they're going to change internally. We might have an hypothesis, but we don't know. And this is kind of the question that you come in with, that foundational thing that you're interested in is really what kind of forms, I think, the intrigue of your book and carries someone through it. And if you don't have that, one question or one overarching line, I think it becomes very easy to lose the script and to get lost in a narrative. And although narratives are beautiful, as you were saying earlier, writers can sometimes get too much caught up in their academic writing. I think that there's certain structures that can underpin that that are really important to think about in fiction too.
Yeah, there are a lot of like crossovers that when I'm giving advice to my academic students in my college classes, sometimes very similar advice to what I'm giving to my creative writers in my workshops or my creative writing courses. So, yeah, I mean, all writing is very similar. There are key differences, but a lot of the time, the advice applies to several different genres of writing. So, for number two, I have know the difference between types of writing. Um, there are four types of writing that I bring up to my students, and that is expository writing, which is unbiased writing. Think like you were going to read a manual for maybe a webcam that you just bought and you bought the wrong cord for. That's expository writing. It is just to relay information. You then have descriptive writing, which creative writers are a little bit more used to. That's where you're describing something, maybe you're using sensory details. Then you have persuasive writing, which is really what you're going to use a lot of in your academic career. Obviously, it's to persuade. There's a lot of types of persuasive writing we don't think about, two of which is advertising. We don't think of advertising as persuasive, but it very much is.
Yeah.
And the second is like cover letters and statements of purpose. Like when you're trying to apply for a job or even like a resume, like in a way you're advertising yourself. You're trying to persuade someone to hire you or to accept your application. Um, and then the last type of writing is narrative, which again we're used to, telling a story, whether that's some form of creative writing or an anecdote. So I think when we're writing our essay, we have to understand the differences between these four pieces of writing and know how to use some sparingly and which ones need to be the bulk of our paper. If our professor is going to ask us to try to convince their audience that there should be more counseling on campus, then you have to understand that it's going to be mostly persuasive writing, but it could benefit you to have some expository writing in there or some descriptive writing or even a narrative. But you have to understand how much of each is going to be appropriate and to be able to identify the difference. Sorry, I really went teacher mode with that one. I taught this morning, so it's all fresh in my brain.
I I think I'm learning. I don't know if anyone's ever like sat down and told me like here are the four types of writing. I don't know if that's ever happened, but as you say, I'm thinking, yeah, that makes sense. Another form of writing as well that I think is maybe especially at the top of people's minds listening to this, because you might not be in college yet, but you might have to write some things to get into college, are college essays, which are kind of a combination of like narrative, persuasive, but you're also probably being a bit expository in a sense about maybe some accomplishments or some things that happened. So I can see how kind of every form of writing becomes a meld of others, and how you in certain settings have to have more of one ingredient than the other. So fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think honestly, one of the reasons I bring that up is because you have all of these elements in a college essay. So, like I said, when you're asked to write something, it's probably going to be persuasive. And you have to know how to write a persuasive paper. But on top of that, you also know that you have access to these other types of writing as well. It's okay to have a narrative. It's okay to start with an anecdote. That's really beneficial and it's really creative to be able to write a piece that kind of comes from somebody's story. But again, you do have to know that this is narrative. You can only have this much of it. The rest of it has to be persuasive. And if you can identify those different types of writing, I think it really benefits your essay writing a lot, actually, a lot more than people might think. So for number 3, and I think this is somewhat of a given, choose a topic you're passionate about. Period. Like, if you don't care about it and you're choosing to write about it, what are you doing? What are you doing? Why are you doing that to yourself? Like, there's no point. Don't choose something just because you think it's going to be easy, because you think that your professor wants to hear about it. There's no point. Pick something that you like. I have had so many students write about their sports team. They've written about tattoos in the workplace. They've written about these things that interest them and are actually more interesting to me because I get to read about what they're passionate about. So,
I couldn't agree more, and I think that that's a truism that extends to other areas of life. Even if you're like picking your college major and the classes that you're trying to take, not any one path in life may you be passionate about everything in that path. I don't know if people are passionate about things like doing the laundry that they have to do in everyday life or taking out the trash. There's some things you do that you might not love, but are good ideas. But I think that if you're finding yourself in a major where all of your classes feel like you're doing something that you're not passionate about, and you're maybe doing it for other reasons, whether that's, to get a stable job, your parents have an expectation of you. I'm not telling you abandon all these other expectations, but you might want to consider it, because if you're not passionate about it, I think that you run a risk of making your life a lot harder and a lot less enjoyable.
mhm. Yeah, I do agree with that. It's so tricky. I refrain so much from giving that advice to some of my students because I do understand that they're here for the degree because they're trying to financially, support themselves, maybe more so than their family could, etc. So I do get it's more of a privileged thing to be able to be in the major that you truly want. But I do agree that like in the long run, if you're doing what you like, um, it's going to help you. Like you're not going to be stuck in a major, stuck at a job that you don't enjoy, and then you end up leaving it anyway. So really throughout your whole college experience, if you can do something you're passionate about, choose a major you're passionate about, write things that you're passionate about. It's worth it, in my opinion.
1000%.
So number 4, again, still on the top 10, or I guess not top 10. Maybe my opinion's the top. I don't know. 10 writing tips for writing an essay. Learn what kind of learner you are. This sounds confusing, and what I mean by this is if you're assigned something, let's say you're supposed to read a piece. I give my students an essay by Stephen King, and they have to read it, and they have to come up with their own opinion, and if they agree, and etc. Um, if you were given this and you read it, and you're not really connecting with the piece, you're going to have to find a new way to connect with it. You're much more independent when you go off to college. You have to do so much more on your own. You got to manage your time better. No one's standing over you asking if you did the homework. You do it or you don't do it, and there are consequences, um, either way. So I think understanding the way that you retain information is so important. Are you an auditory learner? Do you learn from doing, from actions, from movement? Um, are you more of a visual learner? Are you a social learner where you learn with people? Or are you more of a solitary learner where you need alone time and space away to just focus? So I think if you're going to sit down and write a college essay, you need to know the best way to get your thoughts onto the page or retain information that you're trying to retain.
Yes, I think more so than just being a learner as well, I would just add to what is already fantastic advice that it's also important to know what drives you and know what kind of process that you like to engage in during your actual writing process, because you might be the kind of person who really thrives under pressure, which in that case, maybe instead of procrastinating until the last minute, which really is almost never a good idea. I mean, I've been guilty of it, but like the problem is if something goes wrong, like you can be really, really wrong. Maybe set an arbitrary deadline that is before when it's actually due, but like really stick to it, right? Like this is something that really feels serious. Put a degree of pressure on it, maybe add a reward or a punishment to you completing it at that time, because obviously it's not like the for real deadline. But I think that can kind of, maybe then you do it all that day. And yeah, there's some buffer if you end up getting tired and don't want to pull an all-nighter because that's a little toxic, but you can still get that adrenaline rush of doing it at the last minute. Or maybe that's not you, which is, it's probably a good thing if it's not you, but here for everyone. If you're another way that you write, maybe you're someone who likes to carve out a little bit of time each day, then intentionally do that. Like, you have an essay coming up and due, then don't kind of let that guilt eat away at you each day of like, oh, well, I didn't do it. It sounds hard, but sometimes you just have to cut out the discipline, just like, going outside and exercising. I'm going to take 30 minutes. Essay might not be in 2 weeks, but I'm just going to sit here and think about it. And eventually those thoughts will turn into words, those words into paragraphs, yada, yada. And I think that is a really important thing, to know what process drives you and do it, but try not, and no matter what, like, hurt yourself by either adding more stress or more pressure than it's due, so that you're like scrambling literally before a deadline or feeling miserable as you're writing it, even though you're passionate about it.
Yeah. No, so true. Like, that is probably the thing I see freshmen struggle with the most, is the time management part of writing an essay. And yeah, set fake deadlines. Do it. I mean, I am a procrastinator. If you don't know it, you got to know it by now. I mean, I used to get up. I always got my work done, but I would get up at like 5 a.m. when my class started at 9, and I would have to finish the paper. Don't do that to yourself just because it's miserable. But I wish I had the insight to give myself fake deadlines. Like I could put all of my deadlines, make a whole list of all my assignments due, and put them like 3 days before. Let myself scramble 3 days before. Because then once I kind of sit out and do the bulk of it, I have 3 days then to, maybe I proofread. Maybe I didn't finish a paragraph. Maybe I have time to go back over it. And your grade is going to look so much better if you do these things. Yeah, so prioritize that time.
As a fiction author as well, I think fake deadlines are really important, because if you're working on a novel, at some point you're going to have to finish it. And unlike in school where there's a professor telling you when things due, or a job where you have to show up every day, at least in the beginning for most writers, eventually if you have an agent and publisher, and there might be some deadlines incorporated into it for sure that maybe you don't get to choose. And maybe that ends up being a helpful thing for you. But no doubt, to get to that point, you need a deadline that you're at some point imposing. And maybe you organically just finish something, but undoubtedly, like, you're 1/3 of the way through your book, maybe 25,000 words in, and you're like, I'm not, yeah, this next chapter wasn't that great anyways. I'm not really feeling it, but you got to get through the first draft somehow. And sometimes you just got to set those deadlines where it, maybe you work more in a set routine, but maybe you more work under just that pressure of like, I did tell myself I was going to get it done in a month. And I think if you can be accountable to yourself like that, it'll be a superpower.
Yeah. Holding yourself accountable is a superpower. Like, if you can do that, do it. So for number 5, I just have outline. Just outline. Outline your work. Like, always. Always. I tell my students, I don't make them submit an outline. I ask them to submit a rough draft. And not even for all of the papers, usually just about 2 in my course. But I tell them, I'm like, if you outline, you are going to and now flip side, creative writing, sometimes you're a planner, sometimes you're a pantser, but outlining still can be beneficial. And so really, whatever writing you're doing, but specifically academic writing, do yourself that favor. It doesn't have to be anything pretty. It doesn't have to be anything like thoroughly typed out. But put like at the top, be like thesis. And even when I'm writing my thesis statement, all I'll type is what I want to say is, and then I type what I want to say, and it's that easy. And that's like the beginning of my outline. I just think it's so beneficial, and I can't stress it enough.
Why I think it's essential in academic writing and not necessarily in fiction is that when you're writing fiction, your plot has obviously a linear progression to it in Western fiction. And you can, obviously it's helpful to kind of know where that progression is going, an outline can be, but you can bend the rules at times. You can, skirt around things. It's a fictional world, right? You kind of get to choose what's happening. But when you're trying to argue something, your line of reasoning has to build on itself. And it's hard to like take shortcuts because it's like you cherry picking evidence, just coming up with things like you can't, it's not your world. You're writing something that's grounded in the real world. And I think that's where it's much more difficult for, academic writing or nonfiction writing in general to try and not have like an outline that could just be as simple as your line of reasoning, one line for each reason that you have. Um, it's yeah, you can write yourself into like a very, very big ditch, and I don't want to see yourself end up in that.
Yeah, me either. Because I've been there. I've been in the ditch in creative writing and in academic writing, and it's not fun there. It's a little lonely, so don't do that to yourself.
Your professor's like, yeah, I can't help you anymore.
Thankfully, I never got to the point where I was like, I've had friends who couldn't submit things like large papers, and they were just like, they just couldn't. They were like, I literally have no time. So that sucks. It happens. It's okay. No shame, but try to prevent it because it's not fun. It's not fun when you can't finish something or you've written yourself into a corner where you don't know now how to get out of it and you're struggling. Yeah. So definitely outline. Um, Number 6, take peer review seriously. Now, quick note. Um, Take comments with a grain of salt. You're going to get some people who read your work, any form of writing, and you're going to disagree with what they say. That is fine. But if you show up to peer review with an open mind and you're ready to give advice, you're ready to hear advice, that's going to help a lot. Even if somebody doesn't have the best advice, you disagree with them, at least hearing them and taking it into consideration will really help the final draft of your essay.
Yeah, I think as long as you're just not the guy that says the best advice is the advice that is you're always right. Just that's a really good way to approach it. And sometimes you will be right. A lot of times you might be, but it's nice to have a little bit more of an open mind. I agree.
Yeah. Yeah. And for both, I know it's hard for creative work, but they're your peers. They're supposed to help you. They don't always. But if it's a good, healthy class, hopefully everybody there is just trying to help each other. Number 7 is don't neglect the research step. Um, we try to rush this step, I think. It's more boring. We don't really like research. And that might not be true for all students. I actually that's definitely not true for all students. But as a creative writer, I'm not a fan of the research. I just want to make things up. I don't like going out there and trying to search and find credible sources and find enough uh
You belong on
things.
Fox News.
Say again, what'd you say?
You belong on Fox News.
Don't say that. I don't associate
I don't.
me like
You're like I
that.
don't. I don't want to look at my sources.
Oh my god, we're getting real political on this podcast. Oh
I'm
my
just
god.
saying it was too close to home.
That was good. That was honestly a high five through the webcam because I haven't heard. I'm gonna keep it in my back pocket. I like that one. Um, yeah, yeah. I don't. You're right. I don't like to do the research, but it's such an important step. Do the research. Don't be like Fox News. Do the research and check your sources and cite your sources and yeah. So
Yeah, I agree that it's very important to do your research. I think a lot of times people get trapped in their head and don't know where to start with their essay, don't know how to outline. And my answer is like just start doing research. Like half the time that's where it is. And if you've done research and still things aren't clicking, do more of it. Because oftentimes if you just collect sources, collect ideas, you're going to have your own that you're going to be able to bring into conversation with that. But it's very difficult to just out of thin air materialize things. And I think that can be somewhat of a bad habit that we have as fiction authors is that we kind of have this fake perception that would materialize things in a thin air. I can promise you, if you never experience any story and we're just in the woods your whole life, that could be a great life, but you're probably not gonna be able to write a story about things that aren't related to the woods. It'd be hard to think about and relate to. And I think the same thing's true when you're diving deep into an academic subject. You're gonna need to dive a bit deeper to come up with some of the thoughts that your professor may be expecting of you, which is okay. And research can be fun too, because you don't have to like read boring academic sources. Your research can start on like watching a cool YouTube video, and then you could go from there.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. I tell my students all the time, there are so many ways that you can find sources like that, like YouTube videos. I mean, you have to make sure it's credible. But yeah, starting with the research can actually get you to discover what you're passionate about. And also, I've had many students who want to talk about certain topics and there's not enough research on it. And so I'm like, unless you're going to do the study yourself, I think you got to pick a new topic, or you have to, or also I've had students who have an opinion on something, then they do the research and then their opinion changes. Cause
That's cool.
yeah, I mean, it's neat to see that's happened to me before. But yeah, so just when you do the research thoroughly, then you kind of understand more about the topic and you become a little bit more of the expert. So number, what are we on? 8? We're on number 8. Um, proofread. 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 When you're on the procrastination side of things, like moi, sometimes once you finish that last sentence, you got to just get it in before it's due or before class, before midnight, whatever it is. Try not to do that to yourself because there are probably definitely mistakes. Tons of different kinds of mistakes. I try not to do this, but I know professors who will mark you off if there's typos, if there's anything. Um, so just go through it, make sure that you're using the language correctly, make sure you haven't misquoted anything. Give it time. Give yourself 10 minutes. 10 minutes, read through your paper just one extra time before you submit it and save yourself those points off.
Totally. Still waiting for that Grammarly or Pro Writing Aid sponsorship. So if anyone's listening, we're open to sponsors, and I also can have interesting partnerships to further your business. Anyways, these companies who are not sponsoring us yet could be interesting to just put in your essay. They have free options. You could just go on like Grammarly site for free, put it in, and it can help you edit it. It won't edit it for you, but it'll flag errors that are likely there, and it'll help clean things up. If you're tired, if you're like, yeah, like I don't, it's awkward for me to ask a friend to proofread this because I don't want to take up their time, and I also might not have that much time, but I'm tired. Yeah, yeah. Put it in Grammarly, and it'll help out.
Yeah. Yeah. Just have spell check on or grammar check or anything. Like you guys got the technology. Use the technology. Like just do it. Just do it. I'm sorry. That just came to my mind and I had to act it out in my head. Um Number 9. Don't be afraid to add your own personal flair. Think if you are a creative writer, you probably don't have a problem doing this, but I have to usually push a lot of my students to add different types of writing, different forms of writing into their work. Like I have to say, hey, you can add a story about yourself. I know that teachers and professors sometimes will say, don't use, the I pronoun. I disagree with that. It's persuasive. Papers are biased. I think it's okay to add your story or add someone's story to it. I think it's okay to have humor. Oh, I crack up when my students use humor in their persuasive essays, like sarcasm and or any kind of like satire. It cracks me up and it's entertaining. It's okay to create something that is also entertaining. So I just want to say, don't be too hesitant to add your personality into the paper. I feel like your professor would really enjoy it. And we have to read a lot of papers. So please help us enjoy them.
I think that's really amazing insight, and in general, being yourself and being authentic and letting your voice shine through is something that is almost always a good idea. It really is. And it's something that's really tough, something we can feel really scared doing. But as writers, I think sometimes in fiction we can hide behind the voices of our characters, even though we're in there, but we can hide behind that. But I think you're already so good at it. So if you could just step forward and be like, yeah, my professor is going to know this is my voice. This teacher will know this is me. But you know what? They might just end up falling in love with that voice and giving you a better grade. So I don't know.
Yeah. 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 I mean, whoa, no. Don't do anything for a better grade. But if you can safely do something, like, just, so what? Like, make yourself a little different on the page. Just do it. Take that risk. And especially if you're in a large class, your professor is going to enjoy it. This is my last piece of advice. It's kind of small, but it's something that nobody says and it bothers me so much. Number 10, don't use in conclusion to start your concluding paragraph. Now, there are many, like, textbooks, professors, teachers who will say use in conclusion, but I hate it so much. And I feel like I've done it, I get it, but I'm like, do something different. Like, the way that, like, your last paragraph is the way that you exit the conversation. It's the last thing that you leave your readers with. And a lot of the time when we're writing, we're just kind of like, in conclusion, please add more counseling to school. Thank you. And, like, does not, I don't know, this is just such a blah way to end it, especially if you've written a really good paper. So try to strengthen your conclusion by starting it with a bolder statement than just in conclusion. Yeah.
Definitely. I think it's one of those cliches, like ending a book with happily ever after, which
Mm,
might, eh, you know, maybe we want something a little more than that. I'm with
yeah.
you.
Yeah. Good. I'm glad. I'm glad, because I feel like that's one that most people don't agree with. And I feel so strongly about it. Um, I don't, that's, I think that's all that I have in regard to essay writing advice. Michael, was there anything that I forgot or that you had advice on? Because you're actually writing essays a lot more than I am.
Oh, don't worry. I don't write essays that much. No. So I wanted to give advice to people who are specifically writing college application essays, because I think
Mm,
that's important. And in addition to all of this lovely advice, I think like if there's any one singular essay people stress out about the most, it's probably that one. People spend like hundreds of hours writing their essays, and I really sympathize with that. I edited a bunch of college essays. Uh, I think I've had like 4 people already this college essay season ask me to edit their essays. So we'll see if I hit 50 people who ask. I'm not going to say yes to all of them, but I have a lot of people asking me because they know I'm a writer who is in college, and I've read a lot. I used to like charge a bit for it, not like a ton, but I felt like I need to charge for this. Like people are asking me, you know what I mean? So I've like done this before, and I'm like, I have to like get paid for my time because like it takes a lot of time to give someone good feedback. So I'd read them like 10 essays, and I would take, a couple hours and give them feedback. So this is something I've done before, and I myself, obviously getting into college, wrote essays, and I was able to get into Harvard and get a full ride to Emory. So my essays, I think, played a role in that. And I think the biggest thing I've seen, without a doubt, is people crazy overthink those things. Like it's
mhm,
insane. Like they beat themselves out of it because they're trying to kind of mix and match this picture of like what they thought other people should be. And they also think that like adding a specific sentence is going to somehow change their application. They get so caught up in it. And like to be honest, a lot of it is luck. And this is true even for like an
mhm,
academic essay. Hyper focusing on a single sentence isn't always an amazing idea. Like your professor probably won't make the difference between an A or B. A lot of it's subjective. a lot of it's subjective in getting into colleges too, like really subjective. And I see that people will write an essay and then spend 10 to 20 times the amount of time it took them to write it, rewriting it.
Mm.
They will, instead of writing an essay, write a paragraph, overthink that paragraph, delete it, write another paragraph, and they never let themselves actually get into the flow, let themselves actually be themselves. And I get that. Like, it's tough. Like, writing a college essay is really tough. But by the end of it, everyone ends up sounding the same because you've taken yourself out of it and you've taken the feedback of everyone else in your life who's told you, okay, this is how you write a college essay and this is how you do it. And then it just becomes like kind of lifeless, right? Like you're just another person applying to another college who has their set of reasons about why they should get in, and it doesn't really stand out. And instead of trying to stand out, like just be yourself. Like I know that sounds so silly, but to be honest, I'm a procrastinator, like we said. So I didn't do my college essays until like maybe a night or 2 nights before the application was due, which is not an amazing idea, but that's when I started them. And I finished them, right? And life was good. Life went on. And I knew in my heart that, like, to be honest, the more time I give myself to do this, you know, the more people I have read it, the more I'm just going to be overthinking this. And I know what I want to say. I know my story. And at the end of the day, you know your story. And it sometimes requires you being vulnerable. It sometimes requires you reflecting a lot about who you are and why you want to do the things you want to do. But I would spend time like journaling, figuring that stuff out before you even approach an essay prompt. Think about why you want to do this next stage of your life. Figure that out. Which you're not going to figure it all out, but start to approach that. And then maybe don't start your essay 2 nights before it's due. You could start it 5 months before it's due, but don't spend an hour a night, 2 hours a night for 3 months straight writing it. That's just crazy. I know too many people who did that. And like, where did they get for it? Well, they got 3 months of stress. Their entire first semester of senior year was like basically an anxiety pill. And then they came back their second semester and were just like, oh wow, I have senioritis now. I'm totally done, which is cool. Like I had senioritis from day one, but like, you know, maybe like don't add all that stress to it because the stress is not going to change whether you get into the college of your dreams. And also, hot take, but also true. And it could sound hypocritical getting into where I've gone into, but like it doesn't make that much of a difference. Like, and in the long run, it's not going to be on your grave. No one no one's gonna like look at you and be like, oh wow, he's like such a fantastic human being, like he must be such a nice guy because he went to X. Like really at the end of the day, most people don't care. You might be able to get a slightly starting higher salary for your first couple of years after graduating, but that's really it. At some point, even the people who went to the fanciest schools have to do work at their jobs to get higher salaries or to live their dreams. And although the playing field is far from equal, the difference between being like in the hood of like a third world country dying, which like is such a weird narrative because I don't know if a place like that exists, but we like to say those things. And I don't think like there's bad places in the world, but like you can live in most countries and be okay. I can promise you that. But and then being like in like a penthouse in New York City, like that huge gap, like you're probably gonna be somewhere in the middle, and it's gonna be all fine, and you're gonna be fine, and your college essay is not going to determine the fate between you like starving to death and then you becoming a billionaire like at all. And I know most people don't think about it in that kind of extremes, but they will think about it in the extremes of like, oh my God, I'm going to never get the job I want to have. I'm always going to be miserable. I'm always going to be struggling. And it can feel like that because high school is a struggle. It can feel like that when you look at your parents and go like, wow, my mom had to work a second job. You know, my dad was never like able to fully be there for me because he was always working an extra day, or my parents worked a normal job but maybe struggled to support me. Whatever it is, like we all have a story, and I get it. It's hard, but like, come on, you not need to stress so much about one essay. That's just the end of it. Like it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. Like we just need to hear this as a generation. Like we're going to be okay. Like climate change, it sucks, but like it might really mess things up, but it's going to be okay. Like if we stay paralyzed by our fear and don't pick up the pen, nothing's ever going to happen. and eventually you got to close the book too and start a new one, right? That's my like huge rant on this, because I've seen so much people get so caught up in their head about it, and I get it, because like we've been told since like fifth grade, a lot of people who are applying to college, like you gotta apply to college, gotta get into a good college. I get it, but like that's not what life's about. It's not what life's about. And you're gonna get to college and realize like everywhere people are lost. They go to the same parties, they drink the same alcohol, they listen to the same music, they have the same hopes and dreams, and that's like beautiful, yet like also really confusing when you're like, wow, uh, I literally thought that like the difference between me getting into Chapel Hill and Clemson was like me dying.
Hmm. Yeah. Okay, first of all, I need the "it's all gonna be okay" like tattooed on my forehead, like for all situations ever. So I could just look in the mirror and be like, "Oh, that's right. I'm okay. Everything's okay." Um, yeah. Okay, honestly, I don't even want to respond because I think this needs to be a whole additional episode. I think
We
we need to
unlocked something.
do right. I think we need to do one. Let's talk about applications. Like, and guys, comment. Let me know. What do you guys want to hear about? What do you want us to talk about? We are here for it. Yeah, but I think it's really important. Any kind of application essays, cover letters, applying to colleges, and how do you calm those nerves? How can we best use our experience to prepare you guys?
But as a generation, I think that's something we tend to do.
True, true, true. That is all that we have for today, guys. So thank you. I hope you enjoyed, and we will see you guys next time. Goodbye.